Last week I wrote an op-ed column in Colombia's financial newspaper Portafolio regarding some additional ideas that I have about potential measures that the Colombian authorities can implement to fight this economic crisis. The column obviously was written in Spanish, so I decided to make this video for my English-speaking readers. The first three ideas involve the central bank. The first one has to do with my expectation that the initial announcement of increased government spending was not going to be enough. So far, the government has secured about 35 trillion pesos of additional funding, which is coming from government savings, mainly at the local and regional levels, and also most recently some loans that were granted by some of the multilateral banks. However, this might not be enough. The government might need additional money. The Fiscal Rule Committee recently allowed an expansion of the fiscal deficit of the government, which is going to be north of 40 trillion pesos. But again, I think that you cannot rule out the possibility that the government would need additional funding to fight this crisis in 2020. If that were to be the case, the government would need to find additional resources. So far, one possibility is for the government to actually tap international markets. Some Latin American countries have been able to issue global bonds in the capital markets, such as Peru, Panama, Mexico, and those have been very successful issues, but those windows of opportunity are not going to be there all the time. If that were to be the case, one solution that I have proposed has to do with a coordinated effort between the government and the central bank. The central bank could purchase sovereign bonds from FOMPET. The FOMPET is the government fund that manages resources for retirement income of public officials at regional and local levels. And FOMPET would lend those proceeds to the government. These loans can be done in a very similar way and under the similar conditions of those that have already been done between the government and FOMPET. Now, this would require money printing by the central bank, but the central bank has already been doing this with its newly created asset purchase program, in which so far the central bank has purchased about 10 trillion pesos of corporate bonds and 4 trillion pesos of local government bonds. The second idea has to do with the fact that so far the central bank, even though it has announced several measures to provide enough liquidity to the financial system, there's still a concern that that liquidity is eventually going to be transmitted to businesses and individuals. My proposed solution is for the central bank to offer new targeted long-term liquidity operations with banks linked to their loans to non-financial corporations and households. And a special emphasis can be done on loans to small and medium enterprises, SMEs. These could be repo agreements between 6 months and 1 year, or maybe even more. A lot of other central banks in developed economies and even in developing economies have already implemented similar measures, such as the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, the Reserve Bank of Australia, the Reserve Bank of India, and here in Latin America, the Central Bank of Chile. This measure could create an incentive for banks that need liquidity at longer term to actually provide more credit to companies and possibly households. A third initiative, which has been documented by the IMF and has already been implemented by some Asian countries and even in the United States, is for the government to create a special purpose vehicle that would purchase new working capital loans to SMEs from banks, which will free up space for banks to lend more to SMEs. The central bank would provide funding to these SPV to purchase these loans and would receive some sort of loss protection from the government's initial equity investment in these SPV. These loans can also be securitized and purchased by the central bank and even by some institutional investors for broader risk sharing with the private sector. A couple of other ideas that do not involve the central bank directly have to do with some of the loans that the financial system is granting to corporations. The first one has to do with government guarantees. So far, government guarantees in Colombia range between 60 and 90%. But the issue here is that because there's still a portion that is not government guaranteed, that has created some sort of a backlog and difficulties for banks to actually approve the loans to corporations. So my idea would be for the government to actually offer 100% government guarantees on certain bank loans to SMEs with a certain ceiling. And this would be very similar to a program that was recently launched by the UK government, which is called the Bounce Back Loan Scheme. This measure would potentially give banks the confidence to grant loans very quickly to small and medium enterprises. Finally, the other proposed measure would be for partial forgiveness of new bank loans to companies, also especially to SMEs, but provided that they maintain employment. The advantage of this measure is that it reduces financial burden on businesses, plus it tries to protect employment. And from the fiscal side, the advantage that it has is that it doesn't have an immediate fiscal implication for the government.